Alright guys, so today's video is going to talk about Marianne in detail. Why someone like this is so important to think about in the future of FEH, but also why other characters, in contrast, are also really good or considered very good. I'm going to show you guys plenty of footage, I'm going to talk about that footage, I'm going to show you the builds, and maybe help you make these sort of decisions in the long term, or even analyze units in a better way. Let's do it.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is going to talk about Marianne. I want to kind of add on to the previous video that I covered with general analysis of all the CYL units, but I want you to take this video as a way to properly analyze characters as they're released. I think I've been trying to do this since I literally started my YouTube channel, and with that, hopefully I can continue that trend. It's really hard and even impulsive or just hype that you get where you see a new character and you're like, okay, that one seems really good, that one seems really bad, or doesn't seem as good, because you don't right away see what the potential of that character is. Now, I did pre-pick Marianne, I did test her out, and I think she's probably going to be the best CYL of this batch that will age. Potentially contested with someone like Erica, but generally speaking, I'm fairly confident in the decision that I made with Marianne. And I've never really first day picked a unit, unless, I've never done it actually. So I'm really confident in this one, but I'm gonna try to explain that reasoning throughout this video. One thing that I also want to double mention from the previous video is how a turn-based strategy like this can essentially make you think one way or another. So what I mentioned in the previous video is value of turns, essentially one action, how someone like Marianne or Gale Force contributes to two actions. And I think the simplest example of this is literally Pot of Greed, which I didn't mention in the previous video. So Pot of Greed is a banned card in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you play a card game, it's basically turn-based, where people take turns playing cards, and generally speaking, you want to have cards with better value than your opponent. So it's usually very good when one card can basically beat two of your opponent's cards. That's considered good value. And Pot of Greed is like the simplest example of this, where you are trading one card for two of your own and therefore kind of doubling your power. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the previous video, and I think this is a good contrast to someone like Brave Marth and even Brave Hector, is the player phase strategies like Brave Marianne or Gale Force Dancers or just Gale Force in general, where they're basically doing one action and then trading up, doing they either get another action for another kill or they're enabling another character for another action, is something that is it might not seem that good, because when you look at other enemy phase characters, and I didn't mention this, you look at Brave Hector or you look at Brave Marth, they just kill 4 units, and yes, that's actually basically they're better than characters like Brave Marianne when they are in those scenarios. So the problem here is a character like Brave Hector and Brave Marth is limiting because they can only accomplish this in something like an enemy phase, which is where their design intention is. So you take Brave Hector and you're like, I'm just gonna put him here with Flame behind and he's gonna kill 4 units. And that actually happens quite often, so it distorts your perception of that unit to say, wow, he's really good. And he really is, because you get those scenarios where he's basically killed 4 units for one action on the enemy phase. And that's where the limitation comes in. So Gale Force strategies, Brave Marianne, Gale Force, whatever, they are player phase units by design where they can essentially trade up. Now, when you play Ether Raids, you get these scenarios where you are you can enemy phase a lot of teams and basically just win with one unit, and you'll see that value showing right away, and that's why you think those units are really good, including myself. If I can just basically Brave Hector a map and kill 4 units without much effort or thought into it, then you should just take it. But you're going to run into these really difficult maps where that doesn't work, and in fact, most players see you beat their map using this strategy, so they'll try to counter it. They will essentially put in all these counters like Flash and Poison Strike, Fire Sweep. Legendary Sigurd is going to enable an ally to go snipe your support, and you basically lost at that point. You can't get your value out of your enemy phase unit. And that's why something like Brave Marth or Brave Hector cannot be permanent meta staples, because they will just stop working eventually when people counterplay it. It's taking a while, but generally speaking, we've always had this case of a cycle of like enemy phase, tanks getting counter. You can take a look at Brave Ike, you can take a look at Brave Edelgard, or just any enemy phase unit in general. If it becomes too strong, people will adjust defenses to counter that because it's the easiest strategy and it provides the most value. Now, one thing you will rarely see on defense design is people trying to counter Gale Force strategies or strategies that are player phase in nature that provide value, which is essentially Marianne, one of the enablers, something like Dual Peony, Linja, whatever. Linja's actually one of the most, actually the prime example of people trying to counter player phase strategies that provide value, because everyone got free Lin, so everyone's like, oh my god, I need dual hindrance on defense because that unit provides full value. If you enable a Linja player to use the dual skill, that unit now effectively has a 1-for-2 action on player phase, combine it with a dancer like Dual Peony, and you have 2 units, potentially 4 actions, killing 4 enemy units, 3 enemy units on the team left on a player phase, and that sucks. So that is an example of the meta saying, you know what, I don't want you getting your value. Here's dual hindrance, here's dual lift, here's a dual Peony on my team, here's a dual Sigurd on my team, and there is the counterplay. But rarely can you truly design a defense to cover all the colors of the weapon triangle, to counter Gale Force of every single kind of thing like this, to counter enablers that enable like range Wings of Mercy, Gale Force, for example, Air or Uller. And now we have Marianne as another contender for this, or even Dual Peony or Dual Dorothea coming in at range and then killing a dual unit and using their dual skill. Very rarely can you actually design your defense with this in mind. The best thing for like the range enablers is like Farsafe, and the best thing for melee Gale Force is something like Traps, Guard, or just bulky stuff like near save that deny that opening. But that doesn't always work when you have you have now like Brave Erica who can initiate, or you have Elwood or Regan, or there's just too much. You can't design a single unit to do this. So that's why something like player phase Gale Force strategies are always like the wild card, the trick that will make you win against the teams that hard counter the common meta tanks and strategies. So this is, again, I'm gonna sum this all up. This is very like a big already discussion on this sort of thing, and I'd ask, you know, if you want to go like put in your experience in the comments, go ahead. But that isn't even the whole idea of this video. It is literally just a preface of some of the clips I'm gonna show you and talk about, and why Marianne is a good addition to the game, and why you should consider maybe using her if you get her, or not. Think about her in the future and why she can work. Oh boy. Let's actually begin the bulk of the video. If you enjoy this content, smash the button, smash the like button, and again, comments for your point of view, that's totally fine. All right, so as I mentioned in the previous video, this is going to be a more like an in-depth analysis of Marianne. I want to do stuff on Marth, Erica, and Gatekeeper as well. I just need to collect the footage, screenshots, and create a solid foundation of an opinion that would help most of you guys figure that sort of stuff out. But this video will begin with Marianne because I have the footage, the experience now to tell you why she works and why she's potentially very good now and later, with all I said just in the past like 5 minutes. Oh boy. All right. So Marianne is a very offensive-oriented stat spread, which lends well to exactly how you want to use her. Her defense sucks, but it doesn't matter because you generally, if you take a hit, if you take a hit with her, 70% damage reduction will keep her alive in almost all cases. And if you're using her without Wings of Mercy, with Malfala, for example, she's going to deny most enemies from doubling back. And on top of that, she has the speed to compete to neutralize enemy speed bonuses and reduce their speed even further, where she's probably denying most enemy doubles. So she has a lot going for her in terms of self-synergy. However, she basically doesn't have an enemy phase, and you probably shouldn't be using her in that way at all, and protect her from getting enemy phased in most cases. However, having high speed is pretty good for enemy phase, so it is what it is. First thing I want to talk about in terms of builds here is literally her defense usage. Now with defense, I think a good way to think about using her, and not shown in the previous video, and I'm just going to use my own defense as an example here, is basically just hiding her from people sniping her, because again, her biggest problem is her own enemy phase. So that would be people playing into your defense and trying to snipe her through the player phase, which again is definitely a big weakness. So you'd want to put her somewhere in a safer position where she's not liable to do that. But she has a lot of good things going for her on defense. One of that being that she doesn't care about isolation at all. The isolating Marianne does literally nothing. But on the other hand, she is weak to pulse smoke, so if she attacks something and doesn't kill it, and she gets hit by pulse smoke, her dance effect doesn't happen. So that is a weakness of her, but generally speaking, she acts as a nuker dancer. And that on defense is fairly unique. 70% damage reduction. If those of you that have played against Legendary Claude, you'll know how oppressive that can be, especially on a high speed unit like her. If she is more like frontline and you are protecting her properly, let's say with like near save, then she could probably keep her null follow-up and then likely basically get Requiem Dance against everything. Now Flashing Blade combined with Times Pulse means she's effectively going to get her dance special off against everything. It doesn't matter if it has guard, doesn't matter if she one-shots. Most situations, like 99% of these scenarios, honestly, if she one-shots something and it doesn't have guard, then she gets her special off because it's 2 charge to 0. And to 0, it activates after combat, similar to Gale Force. If a unit has, let's say, Special Fighter, let's say Brave Hector, she attacks with null follow-up. Again, depends how you want to design your defense, but with null follow-up, she hits once, it's 1 charge, Hector hits back, doesn't kill because, well, 70% damage reduction, and then the second hit comes out from Marianne if she's using null follow-up, which, again, depends how you design it, and she charges her dance again. So, and Hector doesn't get his auto follow-up again for that second hit, which would kill. So again, depends. If you use 30 Impact, though, with Wings of Mercy, you can achieve a sort of similar effect. However, she won't get that second hit, relying on that null follow-up, so you'd likely want a dancer to dance her, and then she would be able to do the same idea, where she would charge her dance, and then her dance would dance a dancer. So you can see how this kind of snowballs into some pretty potentially oppressive things on defense, and I likely will see quite a lot of her on defense in the coming future. I personally won't be using her on defense because I am too heavy on colorless between my dual units, my carries on defense. It's just too much colorless for me to find a place for her where it makes my team more weak to Raven and such, but generally speaking, on defense, she's unique where she'll stand out enough to potentially swing a lot of matchups in your favor for defense results. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I may revisit Marianne as a defense unit in the future. For now, I think she's really good because she's got that damage reduction, infantry, null follow-up potential, impact with Wings of Mercy. There's a lot of good ways to use her, and she will definitely make an impact there that I cannot truly find out yet the best place to find her, but we will talk about more the offense aspect of Marianne here. So, what I want to talk about here is her, as I mentioned, null follow-up. You can keep Unity in this case, and that works pretty fine. What I want to talk about is some of her player phase potential as well. And that comes down to me, in my opinion, thinking about using her more like a Wings of Mercy, come in and dance another unit who initiated sort of unit. I'm sure she could work with null follow-up on, let's say, Astra Season, combined with like Regan or Erica being the initiators, and then also smiting her in to kind of enable them even further to do some kind of shenanigans. But generally speaking, I think Wings of Mercy is her place, and Light Season is more preferable than Astra Season. Though, again, as I mentioned, it can work in both seasons. One of the biggest factors of why Light Season is good for her is because of Gentle Dream. So one of her restrictions here is that whoever she dances only has 1 movement. If you use Gentle Dream, you pretty much overcome this issue, where a unit can now just ground orders into pretty much anyone around and get into most favorable positions to do exactly what it was doing. In Astra Season, this is a bigger problem, and it will cause some consistency issues that I'm not a fan of. However, if you use her with, let's say, Dual Peony, then Dual Peony on Astra Season, for example, can kind of overcome this by also using Gentle Dream, or you just generally use ground orders, air orders, or whatever on your team to circumvent the Requiem Dance restriction. It is definitely a restriction, and you gotta consider it when playing into things. So in Light Season, as I mentioned, she has that Gentle Dream bonus to overcome her Requiem Dance con, but you also have some really good potential partners that synergize well with how Marianne wants to work. A lot of Gale Force strategies use physical damage, and I'm talking like air, talking just your Gale Force dancers in general, melee. You have to basically use physical damage for Gale Force in this game, with the only exceptions basically being dual Dorothea or dual Peony, who will effectively have to rely on their dual skill to dance someone else, and they can probably snipe a kill, maybe, depends. That's about as close as a comparison as this gets. However, of course, they're green and red, and Marianne is colorless, so they got some differences there. Now, with all other Gale Force strategies, it's essentially colorless. It's basically physical damage in one way or another, and Marianne adds magical damage to this, which helps a lot. So with air, you have the Air Force strategy, which has been used for years now, with Disarm Trap making it more consistent. You essentially just snipe a unit, dance her with Peony, effectively put that Gentle Dream, and then kill another unit. And now at this point, you can either have another dancer jump in and dance air, or you can have Marianne jump in, and depending on Marianne's position, she could actually end up dancing Peony or dance air, depending on how you play this. And I'm going to show you all the footage on why these different scenarios actually end up being really good for being successful at AR offense. So air provides that consistency, but the thing is, air's offensive stat spread has fallen off a little bit, where I feel she's less consistent in overall just working. A more recent addition is actually Uller. So if you end up grailing Rolf for Candleaxe Bow, combine her with Fury, she essentially does the same thing, but has a better offensive stat spread and trades out Disarm Trap's consistency for Yingvi Ascendant, which is essentially the like self-null follow-up, desperation, pretty good effect for getting the initial Air Force, Gale Force, Wings of Mercy units jumping in and cleaning up. So honestly, I would not really recommend one or the other. I think with Bolt Tower, air is still actually better, and then you can not care about traps. But Uller has been okay in my testing so far. And again, I don't think Uller becomes just really good just because his strategy exists. I think it's just another way of looking at it. Finally, as long as you have a bonus mythic season, let's say air is the bonus mythic, or Mila or Peony or whatever, you usually can add Marianne with one other unit, and something like your traditional melee dancer works fine here. Now, because the units like Uller or Peony or just blue in general might be pretty common in Light Season, Freya is, again, another addition that could work for Gale Force, but there is so much to go over that I don't want to like drag this on forever. Essentially, Olivia and Azura, again being blue, are additions that could work here with Curtains, and Olivia with like Slaying Edge, Quick Impulse Time Souls brings her to 2 charge, where she'll come in, and if you've done enough Savage Build damage, she'll likely have enough speed and probably enough to get a kill. Speed IV, attack IV, it depends. There's a lot of like factors here at play depending on your mythics, and none of this is blessed. So try to just balance out what you can work with, and I definitely recommend testing in mock battles against friends if needed. So essentially, these are the tools to make something like Marianne work. And it may sound like a lot of conditions, but once you've done all the prep work and put it together, it's a lot of fun, and it ends up being pretty solid, pretty consistent, pretty fun. So with that being said, let's jump into some footage. Okay, so before we play this, I just want to mention this is actually like the very first game that I tested Marianne in. This is just like the random AR game. And honestly, to most of you, this is probably not going to look like a very difficult matchup that you could probably enemy phase with your traditional tanks. However, it is still a good example to get you thinking as to, you know, why someone like Marianne can work even here. So with my lack of inexperience of this new comp, I actually just decided, instead of just enemy phasing it and taking the easy win, which honestly, if it comes down to it, you probably should do. Like I said, value plays are good. If you can just enemy phase something and it wins, it removes 4 threats from your team, just take it. But for sake of practice and to show this example, I did use Marianne in my very first game, and of course, I also did some mock battle testing, and I'll show you some further footage of that here. So in this particular game, I'm basically just setting up for Uller with the Candle Axe Bow Savage Blow build to go in and set up everything here. This game will essentially show you why a ranged Wings of Mercy that provides an extra action is really good, and the only comparable example being, of course, Dual Dorothea or Dual Peony. Most defenses are going to have some sort of way of preventing this through Dual Hindrance and Dual Heroes, multiple Dual Heroes, so that doesn't always work to use Dual Peony or Dual Dorothea, but with Marianne, you're going to have an option every time, as long as those units can actually engage and set up. But that isn't a con of Marianne. That's just, you're going to run into a team that doesn't want you to player phase because maybe they have just a really powerful far save unit that you just can't initiate on. In the case of this strategy, if you use let's say a melee initiator who takes damage, for example, Erica, Brave Erica actually, and she's able to get under 50%, which probably isn't likely, but whatever. Maybe Elwood, maybe Reagan, whoever gets under 50% and then gets the ball rolling that way. It's just different ways to think about it. In this case, you could actually make like a melee Gale Force team, a range initiator Gale Force team. There's a lot of good ways to go about this to create the team slot to basically overcome teams that won't allow you to enemy phase. Maybe your enemy phase tanking isn't working anymore. Maybe Brave Edelgard just can't win anymore against a lot of teams. Whatever the case might be, and I'm just throwing examples here, it's important to have this sort of team comp and practice it to potentially have some sort of success. What you'll see in the footage here as it plays is that I'm going to smite in Uller. She's going to snipe a unit, get danced, snipe another unit. She now becomes under 50% health because of the Candle Axe Fury recoil, and then you get your Wings of Mercy ball rolling. And even in this particular example, my team comp is far from optimized since Air doesn't have Wings of Mercy and Mela doesn't have Wings of Mercy. In fact, Mela doesn't even contribute to this strategy in any way, shape, or form, and you'd be better off maybe having Freya, or just maybe another Peony, honestly, depending on how many merges and whatnot you have, or what your state in AR is. But you'll see how this basically sets up the range initiator, and with that, you can kind of have many play options. You'll see Uller here is at 50% after engagement, and Marianne's position to go in could be different than what you could see, let's say, with like a Dancer. So in this case, let's say Uller is at 50% and you have, let's say, Olivia or Azura. You'd have to use Olivia or Azura to jump in on the enemy legendary Azura, and then that Gale Force would come off, and then you'd have a choice of either dancing Uller or taking out another unit. In the case here, what we have here is essentially Uller has two actions. Peony traded 1-for-1. Marianne is going to snipe something and dance, and Fjorm, the final Gale Force unit, will also have two actions. All of this counts to a total of 6 kills among these like 4 units. So it doesn't work out when you run into like 7 units and you can't trap a unit, or you can't like fully clear them and then you miss pots. So you can't always win off of this sort of stuff, but it ends up being something that is pretty powerful if you can enemy phase or trap. So you see here, Fjorm potentially can go in on Azura. But what I'm trying to achieve here is that I trap a Versa in the corner there because she has range and, she can't attack if we trap her. But you'll see Marianne came in. She's going to dance Peony. She can dance again. So Marianne gets danced, but Marianne's dance can only be once per turn. We kill Yoon, and then we trap a Versa using Fjorm. Now, this is still likely possible with a melee Gale Force scenario, but again, in Dancer, I'm talking about Dancer, melee Gale Force Dancer, which could be comparable to Marianne, but there's a lot of things going here that could open up the play. Especially dancing a Dancer is something that is basically unrealistic unless it's like dual Peony, and that's why I made that comparison. So this is one piece of footage, but I'm going to show you one more. All right, so here is another case of Marianne being pretty good against a more oppressive team. In this particular case, we have a catapult literally sniping my safety fence. We have odd recovery on the enemy Veronica, which will enable both Triandra and Legendary Azura to dance no matter what. And because of Azura's Grey Waves and Chrom being the 7th unit, he effectively becomes a range cav. In that way, my danger area is completely packed and there is no place to hide. My safety fence is sniped, and therefore I am forced to engage turn 1. A traditional tank may not be able to tank this team, especially because Veronica there has a flash staff, which means that I only could beat this team using a traditional null seed disrupt unit. That creates a lot of limitations for many enemy phase tanks, and therefore I am forced into a player phase strategy. So you'll see as I play through this one that yeah, we basically need to kill the team or win on turn 1, which is what I'm going for here. So as I said, Legendary Crom, Grey Waves, Pathfinder, creating some extremely oppressive scenario. The only way I could see this really working out in enemy phase strategies, which you could definitely do, is to run multi-tank teams where you're just lining up favorable matchups on different lanes. That could work, but there is a lot of ifs and buts on that scenario. And as I mentioned in the earlier that Air actually ends up being nice here because of her disarm trap capability. So there's 4 traps here, and that really can limit the plays that I can do. But thankfully, because of Marianne dancing a dancer and being ranged, I don't have to like touch those traps in any way, and that will enable me to win because I can snipe all the key units, leave up weak ones, and just win off of that. So yeah, a team like this will likely not be enemy phaseable by most players, but if you have this sort of strategy at your dispense, at your usability, you will have a lot more success as long as you practice the team. So with that being said, guys, I think that's how I'm going to be concluding my Brave Marianne preview. There is a lot more footage that I did have, that I did collect, and honestly, I'm going to be playing with Brave Marianne even more, so if you're interested in seeing that content, then I'll be on Twitch sharing my AR gameplay as I always have been, and you can definitely expect me to be using her for months to come because, well, she's fun. It's a lot of fun to use these sort of strategies, especially when you can't take your easy win. Alright guys, that's it from me. Thank you for watching. If you did all the way through, give it a thumbs up if you haven't already, smash that like button, sub if you haven't already, and check out the links below. If you love the content, consider supporting what we do on Patreon. Love you all. Peace.
It's over.